right.
Oh, to be young and single.
Well, they're fulfilling their life ambition right now.
Exactly.
Correct?
Exactly. Audrey, you're a legend. How's
In
Amy?
my own mind.
How's Amy doing? How's Amy doing here in Detroit?
Oh, wonderful.
Is she?
And she seems to love where she lives.
Yeah.
I think she's got an apartment downtown. Yes,
She
an
does.
apartment downtown. And she loves her little dog, Albie. I always ask her about, how's Albie doing? I think she really enjoys it.
Yeah.
And she's got a wonderful personality. I can't see her falling out of favor with the ball club. She does everything. She's even the counsel, the in-house counsel.
That's right.
So what more could a girl ask for?
That's right.
And I don't even think she's thinking of marriage, is she?
Well, she's got a guy, so I don't know if that's on her radar screen, but she does have a significant other.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. Who's not in the baseball business, but is trying to learn.
Maybe that's better, that he's not in the baseball business.
I think you're absolutely right.
But he probably sits at home thinking about all the guys that are here and she runs into.
And she does run into a lot of guys.
Maybe there's a little jealousy there. That's the first question they used to ask me when I was younger, in my younger days. Do you know Al Kaline? Do you know Willie Horton? Do you know Denny McLean? Because they thought I saw them every single day, and for sure that's not the case.
Right.
If you saw them once a month, you were lucky.
Yeah.
Because they would only come up to the office if they needed something. That's it. Otherwise, you didn't see them unless you saw them on the field in a uniform.
Right. How'd you get started in this business?
Well, it's not a hard question. I had a job, and it was at Sears Roebuck in the encyclopedia department. And I loved it.
Yeah.
And I learned so much from working with Sears because I was just out of school. And with every intention of going to college, well, that never materialized, and that's the one thing I regret, that I didn't go. But they dissolved that department, and that left me without a job. So I lived at home at the time, and my only recourse was to look at the papers, the want ads, which I did. And one day I was looking at the want ads, and there was a little blog, and it said, if you were sports-minded and would love a job, etc., etc. So I thought, oh, I love football. I'll go down and see if it's with the Lions. So I went down, and at that time it was Russell Kelly, and they told me to go to the Tigers because they were looking for a secretary. They did not call it administrative assistant, it was a secretary. And I said, okay, that's fine. And at the time I had no car.
Right.
But anyway, I grabbed the bus from where Kelly's was, went down and I saw Mr. Sisson, who at that time was the secretary treasurer of the ball club, and he interviewed me. And before I left the office, he said, by the way, when can you start? Oh. And I said, Mr. Sisson, you want me to start right away? He said, well, they're coming back from spring training, and they need someone to replace one of the ladies that left. So he was really almost desperate to find a girl.
Right.
So I said, well, I can start tomorrow. So that was the start of my career with the Tigers.
Now, was Mr. Campbell, was he the...
Mr. Campbell, at the time I started, was the assistant farm director.
Oh.
Ralph Snyder was the secretary of the farm department. He worked for Mr. Campbell.
Okay.
And Muddy Rule was the general manager and player development all in one. But Mr. Campbell took care of the farm department with Ralph Snyder, and that's who I worked for, both men.
Now, who's the president then?
Well, the president CEO was Spike Briggs, Walter Briggs' son.
Yeah.
And he was, I think, Mr. Spike Briggs was the only boy with 4 sisters. And the sisters at that time wanted to sell the ball club. They did not want to spend all this money on a ball club. And Mr. Briggs, Spike Briggs, wanted to buy it. And he offered them, as I understand it, this is just hearsay, as I understand it, he offered them a price and they said, oh no, we want more than that. So he was out of luck because they were waiting for a buyer to come by. And I think they sold it to a conglomerate, Mr. Knorr, and then Mr. Hansen, and 12 other men were in on this consortium. And they sold the club to him. And at that time, Mr. Knorr was in radio and TV like Mr. Fetzer was. And he kept the ball club for a while, and then there was some kind of dissension between all those men. And Mr. Knorr bought them out. And then Mr. Knorr didn't stay very long, because then he sold the club to John Fetzer. And Mr. Fetzer, you know, I don't know how many years Mr. Fetzer was our owner, but what a nice man. What a nice man. I think he was sickly at the time. So he sold the club to Tom Monahan. And Mr. and Mrs. Monahan were wonderful people. Wonderful people. They were so good to their employees. And he held the club until something happened with Domino's Pizzeria, and he had to sell the club. And who does he sell it to? Mike Ilitch. And there's Mr. Ilitch, just wanting to own the club in the worst way. He always, he wanted to play for the club, and then in the end he wanted to own the club, and there he is.
Have you had much interaction with Mr. Ilitch?
No, not really, because most of his time and effort is spent across the street. If anybody has a lot of time with him, it's Dave Dombrowski and the VIPs, Al Avila and John Westhoff. But he'll come over once in a while, because he does have an office here. And he'll stop by and say hello, but he doesn't linger. He doesn't linger, but why should he? He's got so many important interests on his mind, the Red Wings and the Little Caesars Pizza and the Tigers, but he's got very capable people in those positions that can take care of it.
Year one, what year was that again?
When I came here, it was 58.
58.
58.
And the manager that year was, you know?
You know what? His name is on the tip of my tongue. He was an older man. I can't think of his name. I'd have to look in my media guide.
Eddie Sawyer?
Nope.
No, Eddie Sawyer. Anyways, it was just, those were kind of dog days for the Tigers during those 58, 59, weren't they?
Yeah, it was a different time. It was a different time altogether than it is today. And we had all our games, of course, at that time at Tiger Stadium, which was my home away from home. I knew every nook and cranny of Tiger Stadium. And we had great crowds then, too. But in the beginning, we didn't have the excitement that we have for every single game here at Comerica Park. And even in 2006 and 7 and 8 and 9, it's amazing. And today it amazes me that as bad as our economy is here in Michigan and how many people are unemployed and losing their homes, they always have enough money to save to come to the ballpark and see their Tigers. And I deal with the public, I deal with the fans in public affairs and community affairs, and they're just, you hear them on the phone or they write you a letter and they are enthralled with the Tigers. And I was amazed to hear how well we draw on the road. That a lot of clubs are very happy when the Tigers come into town. And I can remember, Greg, when we had to learn the switchboard over at Tiger Stadium, when the girl there, the switchboard operator, went on lunch, one of us would have to take over. And I can remember clubs calling long distance to find out what the rotation was for our pitchers, because everybody wanted to see Mark Fidrich. Everybody. When is Fidrich going to pitch? Because we've got people wanting to buy tickets for that game. And he died way too young.
Yeah, way too young.
Way too young and way too horribly.
1958, just as a benchmark, that was the year when the Tigers got its first black baseball player, Ozzie Virgil. And was that notable to you? Do you remember that?
It was notable. It was notable. But at that time, like I said, it was a different time when we would, not so much here in Detroit because Afro-Americans were accepted. But in Lakeland, no way. And I can remember working at Tiger Town, going into breakfast in the morning and seeing our Afro-American players eating in the cafeteria because they were not allowed to eat in the restaurants. They could not stay in the same hotel with the regular Caucasian players. They had to find foster homes with families in the section, the Afro-American section of Lakeland, and stay with them.
Okay.
And people probably would not believe that a major league player was treated, I hate to say shabbily, but it was horrible to think that they were not considered as good as anybody else.
Right.
And you had your wonderful players. I remember Chico Fernandez, and I remember Ozzie Virgil and Willie Horton and Gates Brown, and it was just amazing to me. Well, being in the North like we are, we wouldn't be used to any of that kind of thing happening.
Was there any sense, since Detroit was really one of the last teams to integrate, Boston being the last, any sense of, did you feel any sense of pressure on the Tigers to sort of bring up to the big league?
No, never felt that way. I just thought it was a matter of ability.
Right.
That's all. And we didn't have a lot of black players in our system at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know why that was. But I can remember working in the player development scouting department, and Mr. Catalina scouting Al Kaline at the time, and Louis D'Annunzio scouting Willie Horton at Northwestern High. He raved about Willie to John McHale Sr., and the people who were interested in that scouting end of it. And Mr. Catalinas had seen Willie too, and there was nobody else. They wanted to sign him in the worst way, and at that time you didn't go through a draft.
Yeah.
You just went and signed the player that you wanted, and other clubs had the same opportunity you did. But we were lucky that Willie was right here on our doorstep, practically. And he was, his mother and dad were killed very early in his life in a car accident. And he was really raised by Damon Keith, who is in the Justice Department here in Detroit, judge. And he was almost Willie's father. And really put him on the correct path, because anything could have happened in that time. But Damon Keith still is very close to Willie, and vice versa. But no, I don't think the club ever felt any pressure. Not way back then. Now it would be totally different.
Right.
But I still get tears in my eyes when I see documentaries on Jackie Robinson and how tough it was for him.
Mm-hmm.
And if it weren't for, wasn't it the Dodgers? The Dodgers. If it weren't for Walter O'Malley.
Actually, Branch Rickey.
Yes. Who knows what have happened. And what a player he was.
Oh, unbelievable.
Oh. And still you have a lot of great players on every single club here in the American or National League. But it was, like I say, a different time. And in the past.
Right.
We'll push it in the past.
Well, 1958, again, the hot shots on the Tigers at that time were Kaline. What about Frank Larry?
Oh, I love Frank Larry.
He's a Jamestown. He started in Jamestown.
The Yankee killer.
Yep.
He was from Alabama.
Yeah.
He was a great guy. And I loved to go and see him pitch. And that, too, is different, because wasn't it Bucky Harris, the manager?
You're absolutely right.
Yeah, it was Bucky Harris, because I kept thinking it was Bucky Harris. But I can remember they would give the ball to Frank or Jim Bunning or any of our pitchers, and these pitchers would go all 9 innings. I mean, they didn't have like your middle closers, the closers at the end. It would just be that one starter. Even Denny McLean and Mickey Lolich, they would go all 9 innings. And it was fascinating to watch Frank, because he seemed to love the Yankees. He beat them every single time.
Also at that time was a guy named Paul Foytak.
Yeah,
I
Paul.
went back to my baseball card collecting days. What was he like? Remember much about Paul?
Oh, a gentleman.
Was he?
Very much a gentleman. And he was focused on his occupation and his career. And I think he now lives, doesn't he live in Tennessee now? I talk to him every once in a while. But another one was Virgil Trucks, too.
Virgil Trucks, yeah.
Virgil Trucks, I talked to him, and he's got to be in his 80s now.
Yeah.
But we've had so many noteworthy players that have had so many records and been such great stars with the Tigers.
Charlie Paw Maxwell. What I
Yeah.
remember is Sundays somehow he hit home runs. He had that sort of.
Every Sunday.
Yeah.
Every Sunday he was hitting home runs.
Why do I remember that?
Well, it probably stuck in your mind because that was an unusual feat, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Just kept coming up in the newspapers. And again, during that time, Frank Bowling was another guy who started in Jamestown.
Yeah, wait a minute, Frank Bowling, Milt Bowling,
And Milt Bowling.
and Milt
too.
Bowling, because we had both brothers
That's right.
with us.
Yeah.
Just like the Brookins. We had Tim Brookins and Tom Brookins,
Yeah.
who now is our first base coach. But they were, I never met a Tiger I didn't like. And when I was working in player development, I knew them all because they had to come through the player development department, the minor league department, unless we got them in a trade. So I know, that's why I loved when Elaine Lewis told me that who I would be working, what I would be doing, and she says, by the way, you'll probably be working with the alumni. I thought, this is too good to be true because I knew all those people when we first signed them. So we have a bond there. We have a little bond.
Norm Cash. What was he like?
Well, he was a roughhouse, roughhouse. But he was a Texan. What do you want?
Yeah.
He said what he thought. He was very forthright and good player. And again, there's another man who died too young
That's right.
in a freak accident.
Yeah. What was that accident?
They were up north. I believe it was up north. He had a boat.
That's right.
And one night it was, as I understand it, it was a brutal night. It was raining and windy, and he was afraid that his boat would release from the moor where he had it. So he was with friends. He left wherever he was and said, I'll just be back. I'm going to go make sure the boat's okay. I'll tie it up. So he went out there, and something dreadful happened, and he didn't come back. And the guys then began to worry because he should have been back, and they found him, and he had somehow slipped on the dock, hit his head on the boat or hit his head on the dock, and he died.
Oh gosh. I know something like yeah.
And he couldn't have been more than 45,
Right.
maybe 50 at the most, but he was a great guy too, carefree and joked a lot. And I remember one time I was going to see my sister. I think it was my sister. I had to take American Airlines over to Green Bay or Milwaukee or wherever it was, and somehow they knew I worked when I got on the plane. Somehow they knew I worked for the Tigers. I was by myself. I went to sit down, and one of the stewardesses comes over to me and she said, "The captain would like to see you in the cockpit." And I said, "Really?" She said, "Yes." So I followed her in there, and before we took off, of course, we were still sitting on the tarmac. And he said, "Do you know Norm Cash?" And I said, "Yes, I do. I know Norm." He said, "He's a good friend of mine." And they got talking about Norm because he took the plane from Detroit into Texas whenever he had a break, because he lived in Texas with, I think his wife's name was Norma. And we just had a great conversation about Norm. But he was congenial, he was cordial, he was just a nice, funny type person. And you appreciate a man like that.
Yeah.
You do.
During that time period, I'm again focusing on the 60s, Mickey Lolich, I think of Donut Maker. And of course, it's such a big 68 series, but what was he like? He just comes across pretty easy as well.
Mm-hmm. He's smart, he's clever, he's a businessman.
Mm-hmm.
He was, and I can remember to this day when we were in the 68 World Series with St. Louis. And you know yourself, Greg, that the papers were all about Denny McLain.
Mm-hmm.
How can we lose to St. Louis? We've got Denny McLain pitching every third game or whatever it was. And Who was our hero? Our hero was Mickey Lolich.
Sure.
Mickey Lolich is the one who turned the club away, because when we went to St. Louis. When we came out of St. Louis, I think we were 3-1. They only had to win one more game to win the World Series, but we were coming back to Detroit. And Mickey turned the whole club around, and so did Willie. So did Willie. And then I can remember where we were getting off the plane at Willow Run at that time, because there was no metro. It was all Willow Run. And I can remember I was just so happy to be on the same bus with Joyce Lolich and Mickey Lolich. Well, I have to tell you that when we got off the plane, we got onto the buses. Well, the buses were waiting till all of them were filled before we moved on, and the fans could see what was happening on the tarmac, and they broke down the fence. I can remember looking out the window and seeing all these people rush. I still get choked up. Rushed toward the bus. I was scared to death because I thought they were going, and then they started to rock the bus back and forth, and I thought, we're going to collapse. We're going to fall right over. And all they wanted to see was Lolich. That was their hero, and my hero too. But we made it out all right, and then we won the game. We won. And you know Northrop was another big hero. You know how this town went wild when we won that game. But at least it was such a shot in the arm after we suffered through the '67 riots. And then to win the World Series was great, just great. And that is most impressionable with me because it was my first World Series.
Right.
Of course, it's always good to win the World Series.
Right.
But when I was involved in that '68 World Series, I'll never forget it.
You're talking about the riots that were going on in '67, which of course still a lot of hot heat going on in '68. Were you fearful when you come to the ballpark?
I was fearful in '67.
Yeah.
We were told not to come down. Please don't come down, because they had the army lined up on Grand River on either side with tanks. And I can remember when they finally said we could go to work. We were driving down Grand River. You could see all the soldiers. Not police, but the soldiers, the military was there. Yes, I was very fearful. And the riots started from down here in the inner city and worked their way north up to Greenfield and Grand River. And at that time, we were living at Lasser and 8 Mile Road, and that was mighty close.
Right.
And I can still remember we had Saks Fifth Avenue on 2nd, right across the street from WJBK TV, and they showed pictures of people just stealing, mindlessly stealing, cracking the windows, breaking the windows, getting in there and taking the furs and the coats from Saks Fifth Avenue, running amok. And it was, I was scared for my life. I was.
How about the players?
Well, I suppose they were
They
too.
had to get here.
Well, I can't remember playing any games though then. We must have played them on the road. We certainly didn't play them at Tiger Stadium. They must have arranged the schedule where the club would play the games in Boston or in Chicago or in Milwaukee, wherever they were going. They certainly couldn't play them down here. We weren't ready. We just weren't ready.
Yeah. When Willie did his very famous trip into the inner city, did you guys talk about that at all? I mean,
well,
when it occurred, saying, wow.
I read about a lot of it in the papers rather than Willie telling me about it, because of course he was still a player then.
Right.
I didn't get that close to them. But we were fearful for his life, because I can remember, I was not at the game. I think it was a doubleheader that Sunday. And the players and the personnel, they saw the smoke from Tiger Stadium, and they didn't know what it was until they heard on the radio that it was I thought they said it was a blind pig.
It is.
And there was a lot of destruction going on down there, and people were running amok. And Willie, between the games, Willie took it upon himself to walk down that street to try and quell what was happening. I mean, I wonder if he ever knew how serious it was when he was doing that. They probably wouldn't have cared who he was. But he had no bodyguards with him or anything. He just took it upon himself to go.
He did wear at least wore the Tiger uniform,
Yeah.
so he could distinguish.
Yeah.
So
But it was, Greg, I never want to see anything like that again.
right.
Any town that goes through something like that, there's a bridge there between the people, and I don't know if you ever resolve that. I just don't know. But it was scary. It was horrific. It's a wonder they didn't burn down more of the city.
Yeah.
And Willie, he deserves all kinds of acclaim and praise for what he did or tried to do.
Well, aside from that very demonstrable moment where he walks into the crowd and actually puts caution to the wind, was he an advocate? Did you see him speak? Was he involved in the civil rights piece at all? Do you know?
I don't know. I couldn't even answer that knowing what I'm talking about, because I don't know. I just know Willie, and Willie wouldn't stand for anything like that. Right. He just, that was beyond him, why people would act that way.
At that time, the Tigers also had black players, Gates Brown and Earl Wilson. Were they involved at all? Do you recall?
I don't recall. Okay. I don't recall. They might have been. I'm not saying they weren't, but Willie certainly was the forefront of everything. And if they were with Willie, trying to do what they could for the city, and everybody tried to do the best they could.
Well, clearly it's an incredible story, which is embodied in a movie called City on Fire.
You have that now.
I have that, and we'll show vignettes of it Tuesday night.
Okay, and then Willie will speak on it. See, you're going to hear more from him, who is actually there. Right. And it'll probably be astonishing to your people there. You never had anything like that in Jamestown, or?
No, we certainly, because I graduated from high school in '69, and so we certainly knew what was going on. I mean, I was sensitive, but as far as living in an environment, we had blacks, but it was a very much a minority. And so there
not like a big city, like Detroit or Chicago or Los Angeles or.
No,
yeah.
This was something.
But you know what? Could it happen again? Could it happen again? Could a city just explode like that?
You'd like to think not. There are enough safety valves along the way, but yeah, who knows? And probably with a different minority.
But you know, it's still scary to me when I hear our Mayor Bing talk about the city of Detroit. They have to make so many cuts in every department. And where are they making the cuts? With the fire department, the police department. We can't do that. We can't do that. We can't take police off the street when we need them on the street, or we can't close those battalions, the fire department. It's just, I don't know what we can do for the city. We have such a bad reputation around the country. People don't want to come here, Greg. Well, they don't want to come here, and it's not bad.
But you know, it's same as was back in '67, '68. Even now, when Detroit was having all the race riots, it was the Tigers who sort of lifted everybody up by the bootstraps. Even now, when the economy's flat, it's the Tigers that are lifting them up by the bootstrap. Give them a reason to talk, to listen, to come to the game, and obviously hope against hope. They got a team which is very competitive, and we hope to see some playoff action in the fall. I was going to ask you about a couple other players during that '67, '68. You mentioned Denny McLain, who's a character unto himself.
Yeah, sometimes he hurts himself.
Yeah, I mean he was 31 wins in '68 and 24 next year. But what kind of guy was he? Was he a teammate, or was he sort of a man unto himself?
Well, I only knew Danny in one way, and that was we were employees of the Tigers.
Right.
But there was friction, I'm sure, between him and some of the players, and there still is today.
Mm-hmm.
I can see that when I work with the alumni. But he, like I say, he made a lot of trouble for himself. He got mixed up with the wrong people. They probably influenced him a lot, not the good way, the bad way.
Right.
Look at all the trouble that he got into once he left baseball.
Right.
And I think, don't you think, I'm asking you, but don't you think he had a lot of adulation from the fans? 31 ball games? That was unheard of to win 31 ball games. That can make your ego very big, very large. And I think he might have started to believe everything people were telling him. But when I knew him as a minor league player, everybody was trying to make it to the majors.
Yeah.
And he was too. But I know he wasn't a bad guy, but he was just influenced by bad people. And I think any of us could probably fall into that pit.
Denny, ironically, spent some prison time near us. And just when he was released the last couple of years, I know he came back to the area. I think he's in Grand Rapids. Is that where he is now? He's in Michigan.
Yeah, he is in Michigan.
Yeah. And I had last time.
But it wasn't Grand Rapids. No.
You saw him here during the reunion. With the reunion.
Right. When we had the 68 people here.
Yeah.
Yes.
What, did the players kind of interact with him, or did they sort of keep their arm's length when he came here?
Oh, I think a lot of them. They all got together and had a great time.
Yeah. Okay.
They had a great time. But hopefully a lot of them forgot, let bygones be bygones, and they just remembered 68 and the best times they had.
Right.
I didn't see anybody deliberately avoiding him, but nowadays I barely see Denny. I talk more to Sharon, his wife, than I do to Denny, but he had a lot. He had a lot of tragedy in his family too, because I know his daughter was killed in a car accident, and that would wreck almost anybody.
Yeah.
And that would be hard to overcome. But I always like to give him the benefit of the doubt.
He's a pretty big guy now, isn't he? Amy showed me a picture of him. He was just like he's a heavy.
Let's say he's a little rotund. He's a little rotund.
Yeah.
He likes the good food,
Well,
like we all do.
well, we haven't talked about Al Kaline, who is Ernie Banks is to the Cubs, as you know, Joe DiMaggio was the Yankees, and certainly Al Kaline is to the
And Mickey
Tigers.
Mantle and Roger Maris, and we have our Al Kaline.
Check. When you came here in '58, was he the star in '58?
He wasn't quite there yet,
Mm-hmm.
but he was getting there. He was, and I can still remember seeing him play in the outfield. He was so graceful, and he caught everything that was thrown. Wasn't he the youngest? At that time, he was the youngest to win the American League hitting title.
Yeah.
And to this day, Greg, he's a wonderful individual.
Mm-hmm.
He loves people, and he's kind of timid. He always was. But what a great man. And he's loved by so many people. And what a star he was for us.
Yeah.
And I can remember Mr. Catalinas always talking about Al Kaline and almost living with the family, because he really dearly wanted to sign this boy. And at that time, he was what they call a bonus baby. He had to sit on the bench with the major league players, and even he had an article in the paper the other Sunday or whatever it was, and he was so nervous, he said, sitting next to these stars, and there he was, only 18 years old, just out of high school.
Yeah.
But there'll never be another Al Kaline, never. And he still looks the same as he did when he was
Well, I know
18, 20 years old, except he's got a few gray hairs like we all do.
Well, I'm amazed, because I do see him in his offices near Amy.
Yes.
He'll walk by and we'll talk, because I'm a doting fan too. You know, like, wow, And he'll come in because he kind of likes to talk to Amy.
Yes.
Not me, trust me, it's Amy. So it's still be such great, she looks just in such great shape. Gates Brown, I see him upstairs, or here, I guess, coming. He seems to be quite the character. You know, hail fellow, well met, he greets everybody, and everybody still reveres him here. And yet many years after the fact. Well, what is it that's so endearing about Gates Brown?
I guess just his personality.
Yeah.
How he reacted to playing for the Tigers, and there's another fella that had a rough life but got an opportunity to play pro ball and made the most out of it. Has a wonderful family. Still lives in Detroit, makes it his home.
Mm-hmm.
Good friend of Willie's and a lot of the players. And he's had health issues,
Mm-hmm.
but he's overcoming them too.
Great.
And I didn't know Gates that well. I know him better now than I did then. But everybody says great things about him, so I know he had to be a good guy.
You being a very attractive lady,
Oh, thank you.
being in the office, did players come and pay attention to you?
Some did.
Yeah.
Some did in my younger days. But we were all, and not only me, but there were 3 other girls that went to spring training, all 3 of us. And we were told by Mr. Campbell that our job was sitting at that desk. He didn't want to hear any stories about us after hours. And we tried, and we were very impressionable at that time. I mean, we were scared we would lose our job if anybody caught us with a ball player. So, and then I got of age where it didn't matter anymore. These kids were young enough to be my son. So, but yeah, we had, let's say we had our fun.
Yeah.
And Mr. Campbell never knew about it. I didn't say anything. But he had to think it was dangerous to bring 3 girls down there. In the beginning at Tiger Town, they hired interns down at the business level. And then one year Mr. Campbell decided, why should we do that when we've got the girls sitting here doing nothing during spring training? Everything was down there. So he asked myself and Pat Healy, who worked for Hal Middlesworth, and Pam, who worked for Mr. Campbell, if we'd like to go down. And boy, would we ever, we'd love it. We never would have an opportunity like that again. So that was the start of a wonderful life too, because we spent, let's see, we spent January, February, March, April. I was the last one to leave because at that time the minor leagues started much later than the major leagues, and we had to stay down there and make sure everybody left to go with their club to their city. So I never got home until around the 22nd of April. But we had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It was a lot of fun, and there were a lot of good guys. But you have to think too, Greg, that a lot of these fellas that came down to spring training, I'm not talking about major league, I'm talking about minor league, were already married. A lot of them brought their families. The single ones, they were just having a good time.
Yeah.
A lot of them were engaged. So really there was nothing to fear, and we just got along famously, all of us, all the girls.
Well, of course, Mr. Campbell would say there's nothing to fear but fear
Yeah.
itself.
Somebody else said that too, didn't
I know,
they?
yeah.
You quoting that? But Mr. Campbell was wonderful. I love Mr. Campbell because I learned everything from him and Mr. Ralph Snyder, because we all worked together. And I can remember Mr. Snyder saying, you know what you should do is take the blue book. We had a blue book, baseball blue book, and go home and read all the rules and regulations. And I did. I was reading all the minor league rules and regulations, and sometimes in the office we would get in there. I would always get in there in time for breakfast. That was 8 o'clock in the morning in the cafeteria. Then go right from there to the office, and probably sometimes not get out of there until 9 or 10 at night. Because once you started to break camp and everybody started shifting, we had to sign them to new contracts, new addendums, get transportation for them, release them. Oh, that was horrible, horrible. And that was all done by hand. We didn't have computers like we have now. When we went to computers, it was much, much easier. But in the beginning, you had a typewriter, an electric typewriter, where you were doing all your paperwork, all the agreements, all the addendums, everything. Yeah, there were plenty of times when we would go home around 9 or 10 at night. So we had no social life. There was no social. We were tied to our desks.
Well, again, Mr. Campbell would appreciate that. Jerry Klein was one of...
The mayor of Tigertown.
I want to know about Jerry Klein because he spent his months up at Jamestown.
That's right.
And we have a movie. I actually have a documentary on Jerry Klein. So tell me about Jerry Klein.
Well, I think he was a friend of Mr. Campbell.
Yeah.
He worked somewhere where Mr. Campbell lived, or I don't know how that connection was. But I know that he had asked Jerry to come to spring training because he would use Jerry to go for errands.
Mm-hmm.
Like if we needed something, Jerry would run down there and pick it up. And he was a middle-aged gentleman. And the crowd loved him at Marchand Stadium because he would always go around singing and enjoying the life, and the fans loved him. They gave him a big hand, and just a wonderful, and they really loved Mr. Campbell. It was a shame when we lost him. But he loved Jamestown. Wasn't he the bus driver there for the club?
Everybody's got stories about Jerry Klein.
Oh, I can imagine. Yeah, we all grew up together there.
I'll send you that when I put together all these little vignettes of stories of Phil Regan and Tony Phillips and Danny Carnavalli and all these guys who are all part of the Tigers system, and they all have a story about Jerry Klein.
Sure.
And I captured them all into one video. So
But Jerry was all over the place. He was at Marchand Stadium. He was at Tigertown. He was in town. The town knew him. Parks and Recreations knew him. I mean, there wasn't anybody who didn't know Jerry Klein.
Mayo Smith, manager, 1968, but wasn't here that long. What kind of reputation did he have? Do you remember Mayo Smith much?
I remember Mayo Smith, and I think he was a good friend of Mr. Campbell's and handled the club well. And I think everybody thought he had the horses. Why couldn't he win? Mm-hmm. At that time, he wasn't what you would call somebody that stood out from the crowd.
Right.
He just kind of blended in with everybody else. He wasn't like a Billy Martin.
Perfect segue.
Yeah. Well, but anyway, I liked him. I liked all our men. I especially like Bob Sheffing.
Yeah.
Quite a great guy. We had a lot of wonderful people that...
Did you get to see them? Did they spend time in the office, sort of
Oh, yeah.
milling around the managers?
Yeah. They were, if nothing else, they were there to see Mr. Campbell, who at that time was the general manager, and ran everything. Ran the player development, minor league department, everything. But Mr. Campbell was devoted to baseball. Mm-hmm. That was his life. He was there at the stadium all the time, and he expected the men in charge to be there also.
Did he and Billy Martin get along at all?
He wasn't afraid of Billy Martin.
That makes him unique.
Yeah, he just, now Billy could be very temperamental, but Mr. Campbell held his ground. Mm-hmm. And, but see, Billy was Italian. He was Italian. And I think he liked working for the Tigers, but I don't think he liked to be pigeonholed as just a manager. He was friendly with the players. He always chummed around with the players, went to drink with the players, party with the players. And I don't think, Mr. Campbell, I think, thought there should be a definite line there that you're the manager, you're going to take care of these players on the field, but he didn't want that interaction in there. I don't think Billy really did he stay long with one club?
He would go, he'd have some success, He'd always elevate the club. You know, the team
Yes.
would do better when he was there. Never always kind of continued. Then all of a sudden he'd get fired. How many times did he get fired with the Yankees? It was.
And I would love to have known him when he was a player with the Yankees.
Oh, yeah.
He must have been holy terror.
Wow, yeah, with that whole Mantle,
Yeah.
Boyd Ford crowd.
Yeah.
He had a fight.
Yeah, with Ike Blessett. Is that what you're talking
Well,
about?
was it Boswell or I was just looking at a note
Oh, you're
here.
talking about Major League. Okay.
Yeah, Billy Martin had a fight. They said before he was fired, and this would have been 1970, I guess. He had rocky relationships with the players, which included a legendary fight with pitcher Dave Boswell in an alley behind Detroit's Lindell
AC
Sports Bar. Do you remember that?
I remember the club.
Okay.
But I don't remember that fight. I remember the fight he had at the Foxfire in Lakeland with Ike Blessed in the parking lot.
No kidding.
But see, Billy had such a temper. He'd pop off at anybody. And some of those players didn't care who he was, manager or whatever. So I can imagine that Billy was well known, but for the wrong reasons. Or maybe people wanted to see that. Maybe they didn't want a passive manager. They wanted somebody who would fight for the rights of the player, or even fight with the player. But he was one of a kind, believe me. Very much so.
Well, you had another manager who was one of a kind, Sparky Anderson. Did he come up and interface with you guys much?
Oh, yeah. Every day we had a game here, or a night game. He'd come around to, not just my office, he'd come around to everybody's office at Tiger Stadium and sit down in the chair and get very personal with you. How's your family? How are you doing? He was unique, Greg.
Yeah.
There'll never be another one like Sparky. And he devoted so much of his time for catch.
For the camera, what's catch?
Yeah.
What is it for the camera?
Oh, I'm sorry. The children's organization. And he started it. He started it, and it's big here in Detroit. We have golf tournaments all over and other banquets, that type of thing. And I just felt so terrible when he passed away. Sometimes he'd come back to Detroit for catch, and you could see there was a difference in him, especially in his eyes. But what a man. What a perfect gentleman.
Speaking of gentlemen, Ernie Harwell. Did he likewise come through the office much?
I didn't see Mr. Harwell that much. Once in a great while, he would come because he didn't have to be here early. If there was a night game, he would just come in time. But talk about the stories and that he knew so much about baseball. That's why every fan loved him. And when he, I don't know, I think he was fired. I think he was let go. And they brought him back. Wasn't he fired?
I think that's right.
By Monahan,
Yeah.
and then he left for a while, and then Mr. Illich hired him back.
That's right, yeah.
And but then again, he and Miss Lulu, oh, they are just they were a perfect couple. And he did a lot of charity work also. Just a good individual. I don't know how more perfect you can be.
We had a rock solid faith.
Yes. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And his voice was like honey. He just, you'd turn on that game and you'd want to listen to the game just because of Mr. Harwell. And, I mean, we have a lot of good announcers, but they don't have the background that Ernie had.
Yeah.
And he would always talk about sitting at the desk calling the game off a ticker tape.
Yeah.
Off a ticker tape. He wasn't even there at the game, and he was. Oh, and I'm sorry I missed the play. I missed the play that was down here at the Gym Theater.
Yeah.
I hope they bring it back because I would love to see how they treat Mr. Harwell.
It was great. It was fabulous. In fact, the actor that we saw the opening night.
Yes.
We were here opening night, close your eyes and it's Ernie Harwell. The voice, everything was.
Is that right? He's
that good.
He's that good?
Yeah.
He really studied him. Must have studied him to get the voice action and
Yeah.
oh.
Mitch Albom wrote the play and did such a great
But
job.
he made a joke out of it one time too, because somebody asked him something about Atlanta, and he says, well, that's when he was traded for another catcher or another manager or something or other. They never heard of an announcer being traded for a manager.
And that's what happened, yeah. Unbelievable. Back before them, a Baseball Hall of Famer, announcer, George Kell. What was he like?
Now that was a Southern gentleman.
Yeah.
Mr. Kell just, he and Ernie made a really good team, because he had that honey voice also, that Southern accent. I can't imagine that we had all these wonderful people in our organization. And at the time you don't know it.
Right.
You take it for granted.
Right.
But, and he was a darn good third baseman too, wasn't he?
That's why he's in the Hall of Fame.
You betcha.
Yeah.
You betcha. No, he was very gracious. A true Southern gentleman.
You tend not to have, seemingly, the Tigers players, who many of them are in the Hall of Fame, most of them don't have their egos where they wear it on their sleeves. I mean, it just seems to be a Midwestern kind of mentality. In '84, though, you had some personalities, like Kurt Gibson.
Oh, yeah.
And what was he like?
He was abrasive,
Uh-huh.
and certainly nobody was going to tell him what to do.
Mhm.
And I thought, well, that's because he was a football player. And as I understand it, he played football for Michigan State and only went into baseball like the year or two before he left. But he was good enough to be, was he drafted by us, or did we? It must have been a draft then.
Mhm.
But Kirk was okay. I didn't know him that well. But see, he wouldn't be my friend because I just wouldn't appeal to him at all.
Right.
I'm like a Pollyanna. He's far from being that. But he helped the club. He did a good job for the ball club. Now he's with the Diamondbacks.
Right.
Good, and I think he and Dave Rosemar are brothers-in-law.
I think you're right.
They married sisters.
Yeah, yeah.
And Dave I like. Mark Fidrich I loved.
How did you love Mark Fidrich? Did he actually engage the staff too? I mean, he was so seemingly everywhere.
There was no one he didn't like.
Yeah.
No one he didn't like.
Yeah.
And he got along with everybody. And you can always tell Mark was, at that time we had the old barracks at Tigertown, and you can always tell when Mark was there because you'd hear that door open downstairs and he'd be yelling and chirping and coming up the stairs, and just a wonderful personality. And there was a guy that was unique because he just appealed to everybody. He'd go, well, you know yourself, he'd go out on that mound. Nobody ever saw anything like that before.
Okay.
Smooth out the mound, and he was a darn good pitcher. Although we didn't have him for a long time. He wrecked his arm or something,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
they could never repair it. And there went his career, and he was still a young man. But Mark was.
Was
we
he
were
that
so
like that
thankful.
off the field as he was
Yes,
on the field?
exactly. What you saw on the field was exactly what you got off the field.
So it wasn't a show.
Oh, no, Greg. Was not. I knew Mark from when we signed him to the major leagues, and he was just a very, he was interested in you as a person. He loved people.
Yeah.
He just loved people. And he had that wonderful Eastern accent. Darling. And I can remember, they always called him the Bird, Mark the Bird Fidrich, and that came from Joe Lewis, who was his manager at Bristol, because he had a gait. Mark had a gait about him. And it reminded Joe of that Sesame character, the Big Bird,
Yeah.
and that's how he got the nickname.
No kidding.
Mark the Bird Fidrich.
Yeah.
But he loved to pick up that baseball and pitch. That was his career. But no, we'll never see, a lot of the people that you mentioned, we'll never see anybody, and maybe so. That's wonderful that you put them in this one niche. There's never going to be anybody else like them.
Right. We had a couple of, during that 84 era, Whitaker and Trammell, and especially Alan Trammell, who we've come to meet in Jamestown, just come across as just genuine people.
Yes, that's right. Alan is that way. He'll never change. He's like Al. A wonderful person. And especially, it's wonderful too when you haven't seen him in a long time and you'll get a little note from them, or you'll pick up the phone and call you. And that to me means a lot to me, because they haven't forgotten you. They still remember you. And they talk, even the alumni, some of the alumni will call, hey, you know who asked about you the other time? Dick Jazuski asked about you. How are you doing? John Young. And I love that. I love it. To make that kind of impression on people.
Right. I
I don't care if they're ball players or lawyers or whoever. It's nice that that stays with them.
Yeah.
And Alan, I wish him the best. I wish he and Lou Whitaker the best. And what a great combination.
Yeah.
And it was so great to see that when we closed Tiger Stadium, no more games, that was it. And to have all of them back, and to take the positions where they played. Oh, I think the fans really loved it. And that's another thing. I think they endeared themselves to the fans.
Mm-hmm.
The fans remember them. They're not going to forget the Kalines and the Trammells and the Gibsons and the Fidriches. They're going to remember all that. And Ernie.
Yeah. As you're sitting here today, and this has got to be your, I'm doing the math, 50 years?
Yeah, about 56 years.
56 years.
Mm-hmm.
How do you reflect on the Tigers? As you just kind of kick back and times to say, my gosh, I've seen it just about everything.
There wasn't a dull day. I can't say that there was a boring day that I worked that something interesting didn't happen. And I thought, where would you ever get another job like this? It wouldn't be insurance, wouldn't be working for the car company, wouldn't be working for Quicken Loans or anybody like that. It was just, it was a wonderful opportunity I fell into. And it just so happened that I was there at the right place at the right time, because they needed someone. They had to have someone right away because they were getting back from spring training and there was nobody to fill that position. And that started a whole career. But of course, Greg, it might have been a lot different had I married.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to find anybody to stay with one company all those years.
Sure.
Now, if I had married and had children, it wouldn't have been this long. I would have quit a long time ago.
Okay.
But when you're single like I am, your job and the people you work with are almost a second family to you.
Right.
You do have your family, your own family. But I love coming to work. We always had the greatest times at work, and the people were wonderful, and they still are. And I would like to think they think I'm that way too, otherwise why would they keep me?
I'm sure
Or maybe they're just afraid now that I'll sue them for discrimination or something, I don't know. But Dave's been good to me, Dave Dombrowski and Al and John, and the people I worked for, Ricky Bennett and Dave Miller and so many people.
Are you writing a diary or a memo?
Well, Dave Miller, who came to us in '67, and I worked for Dave, to this day we always say we should have kept a journal. We should have kept a journal and written down everything that happened that particular day. We could have probably sold millions of copies. Maybe not. But we were on the inside in a lot of cases, and it just made it more enjoyable. And I've never regretted it, except that I didn't go to college, and I would have loved to have done that. But then the job got bigger and bigger and bigger, and I just didn't have time to go to college.
You became invaluable to this organization. I mean, you've got to be the longest running.
I am.
Yeah.
I am. I remember when Brandon Inge and I were asked to raise the flag on the Central Division champions.
Wow.
And he was the longest player in tenure, and I was the longest employee in tenure. So that was a thrill too, because Brandon Inge was my favorite player. But I would like to think I'm invaluable to the organization. I was anyway, because player development was just exactly like working for a general manager of the major league club, except we had 6 farm clubs, and 6 farm clubs had 20